that it had a retransmission? Was that normal for TCP to have maybe some congestion on the link and retransmit? So the actual retransmission itself is not necessarily the issue, but why it retransmitted may be what the issue is, and the expert's not going to tell you that. That's something you're going to have to figure out directly from working within the expert itself. Okay, TCP/IP analysis overview. So we covered this earlier. Define the basic TCP/IP functionality. What is TCP/IP used for? You're going to have to understand these headers for the exam. You're going to have to know if I look at an IP header or a TCP header, what are the components? If I have a handshake and I see certain packet flow, what does that mean? So that's what that means. How does it work? What's the handshake? What happens at layer 3? You're gonna have to understand ports. This is and these two the ports and IP addresses is something again that I had mentioned earlier on. Kind of the Network Plus basic information is knowing what a port is and knowing your IANA.org type of ranges, what's allowed, what's not, what's standard ports. Basically, like for example, FTP. If it uses ports above 1024, what does that mean? Can it do that? That's all that type of stuff, because you're going to see it in a capture and they'll ask you questions about it, and having that fundamental knowledge is going to be able to help you to answer those types of questions. So I'm going to lightly go over these. You're going to have to understand DNS, obviously, to be able to answer questions. But for example, and we'll cover this in the module, what is recursive in a packet? When you see that, what does that actually mean? So that kind of stuff will manifest itself into some of the questions on the exam. ARP, great question. Does ARP even have an IP header? No. That might trick you up, those types of things. What is a gratuitous ARP? Why does it happen? These are the types of things you would probably need to brush up on. Analyzing IP traffic, as we mentioned earlier, you see traffic taking place. What exactly is the source IP? Where is it going to? Is it accurate in the capture file? Depending on the question that's being asked. Specifically, diff serve options, is that something that you should be concerned about? Things like that. ICMP, basically what is echo, what is a reply, what do these things mean? We'll cover this in depth in the module, but these are the types of things that you will need to know from looking at the capture. Same with UDP, very relevant as to we know it's connectionless and we know it's very different from TCP, but if looked at in a capture, what does that really mean as part of a question of troubleshooting? TCP actually you see is very long here. It's probably one of the most important protocols to focus on for the exam because of the tools that Wireshark uses to allow you to help troubleshoot this. Obviously, we looked at the flow graph earlier. There are some, and the TCP stream graph, which we'll look at in a particular module, but there's some very specific things going on with flags that are being set, patterns, trends, and what that really means for you when you're analyzing the capture and or preparing for the exam. Graphing and trending. This is based out of the statistics menu, but more in depth. Some specific stuff that you will need to know. The different things that you could use within the tool, or I should say the tools. DHCP, same thing. If you have a relay agent, what's broken? Why is it not working? What's DORA? HTTP, basically I kind of covered it very briefly before when I looked at when I grabbed the TCP stream. But that again, that you don't see TCP stream in here in analyzing HTTP traffic, but that was a way. So again, very important to understand the whole tool and how it works together. That's a very good example of a question that you may be presented with, or a scenario where you need to figure out a problem with a web server, and the answer may not necessarily be too clear to you without knowing how to use the specific tools. FTP, obviously, when you say passive mode, the PASV and the different modes, and what does that show up as in the capture? What does that mean? What ports does it use? Analyzing email traffic, or SMTP or POP traffic. Again, just kind of going through these protocols rather quickly, but essentially problems that you would have with the communication, how to look at the capture itself and what to do with it. Wireless, again, out of the 100 or so questions, 90 of them are not on wireless, but a good section would be on wireless. We covered this in the foundations, and we'll also cover this in the advanced, but there's a lot of differences, obviously, with wireless, and the things that Wireshark can do to help you to look at things, what's beaconing versus monitoring. How does that look? What does that look like in the capture? VoIP. In the foundations, we did some interesting things with VoIP. We'll do some more here, but basically, what does this look like in the capture? There's some specific tools that you can use to play back voice traffic. Baselining normal traffic patterns. So we know this as being network people, operators, engineers, managers, leaders, analysts, the list goes on. But basically, all of us know that network, once you build it, optimize it, understand it, tweak it, you have a baseline. That's what it looks like. That's what's considered normal. And then suddenly all these things go on. They add servers, they add new applications, they upgrade applications, they add more users, they add another company, they do all these types of things, which is called business, and it's fine and it's normal. But how does that relate to you as the network person, and what does that mean against your normal? And how do you use Wireshark to look at those types of things and figure out how those changes impacted your normal is very relevant to the exam. Top causes of performance problems, and we're going to talk about this through every single module in every single in both of the foundations and the advanced course. I am very big on talking about problems because, in my opinion, Wireshark is basically a problem-solving tool. So we talk about finding, troubleshooting, and performing problem solving constantly, and a lot of us understand what that manifests in as either looking inside a Cisco switch and looking at, let's say, the buffers, or looking at drops in QoS on a router, or whatever it is. We know that performance is impacted in many ways. You may get a surge of traffic, backup may run overnight and run too late into the day, cause contention on the network. There's so many things that we can see, and they manifest themselves in very specific ways in the Wireshark captures, for example, and we talked about earlier in retransmission of data. For example, you're having windowing conditions that you will see. All of these things are things that you need to understand for the exam. At the end of the course, we'll talk about network forensics, but basically understanding how to use this tool for forensics. What does forensics mean? Detecting, scanning, and the discovery process, basically how to use this tool to see traffic. You could use tools like Nmap to generate the traffic that you want to see in test environments or in production networks. But basically understanding what those captures look like. Definitely need to know what a scan pattern looks like against the capture, and knowing why that's important, and understanding how to find it in the packets, lanes, panes list, and what it actually manifests as in the capture is very crucial to cover for the exam. Analyzing suspect traffic. So some specific things, like, for example, In the foundations course, we covered a teardrop attack specifically, which is part fragmentation. So looking and seeing specific traffic patterns and knowing what they are, and how you can identify them in the capture is very relevant. I had mentioned this in the foundations course, but I'll definitely cover it here, as well as the Wireshark.org, the actual documentation site. There's also a repository of capture files. So you can capture your own. There's some specific capture files that you can find on the website itself. But just to make life easy, you can go right here and you can go right to sample captures and start downloading stuff you want to look at immediately. I had mentioned this in the foundations. I'll mention it here. Most of the examples I give are right from here, specifically because this is really the de facto standard. They've already been filtered out. If you want to see what ARP traffic looks like, here it is. If you want to see SNMP, NTP, most of it's here. SIP. So there's a lot of stuff right here, right outside the tool to use. And the rest of this course is based on real captures that we're going to do right away, right on the network, and just say, look, here it is. This is how I captured it, and what you can do too. Because basically that helps prepare you for getting through the exam itself and being able to navigate the tool pretty accurately. Okay, we have like 3 or 4 modules directly on command line tools. Again, because it wasn't covered very in depth in the foundations, we did cover it, but we pretty much exhausted here in the advanced course, because again, and you'll hear me say this whenever I refer to the exam, it's very evenly presented. So I'm already on section 33 of the syllabus, but believe it or not, they pretty much cover everything on the exam, and why. And while they do that, it's a nice covering of all of the key objectives, as well as all of the objectives. But examples, using edit cap, using merge cap, these are some specifics that we're going to go into when we do those specific modules. And folks, that's it for the actual syllabus. So I know this was long-winded, and I wanted to answer this question for the group out of the forum. Thank you, Ryan, for asking this particularly. But I think the covering of the syllabus is very relevant to preparing for the exam, because it is very in line with the actual exam itself. Those who produce the exam, the Wireshark University, basically make that exam themselves, so it's very evenly covered and presented on the exam.